Alrighty, hey guys, welcome back to another week of Repro with PS Papa. I hope your second week is going well. So this is just going to be a quick video, just going over the ovarian and uterine cycle, and just to give you guys just an overview of basically what's happening and what's it all about. So we're going to start off with the ovarian cycle. So this is what you can see in the diagram below. And it's basically responsible for producing gametes during the fetal period, as well as a couple of just hormones as well. There's two cycles to it. So you've got your follicular phase, which is the first one, and it lasts from day 1 to 14. And you've also got your luteal phase, which is the second phase, and it lasts from day 15 to 28. And that basically makes up your hormones. So we'll go through the different stages that you can see. So in this top diagram over here, we'll go through all the stages. So stage 1, we start off with the primordial follicle. So as you can have a look, this is basically your earliest follicle type. And it's basically, as you can see in the diagram, it's just one oocyte, which is this green thing in the middle. And that's oocyte's actually going to be arrested in prophase 1. And the oocyte is going to be surrounded by a single layer of these cells that we call granulosa cells. And these primordial follicles are always going to be present within the ovary from birth. Prenatally, there's around 6 million oocytes, but this number basically is going to decline steadily until you basically hit puberty. You've only got 300,000 left, and then at menopause, you've only got 1,000 or less than 1,000 left. All right, so that's stage 1. We'll go on to stage 2. So stage 2 is your activated primordial follicle is now going to become a primary follicle. So a couple of changes occur that you can already see in the diagram. You can see that your oocyte has now basically enlarged and it's become fully grown. It's quite a big boy now. You've also got the formation of this more thinner layer, which is called the zona pellucida. And this is a glycoprotein layer that surrounds the plasma membrane of the oocyte. And you can see that it's basically surrounding it, and it's basically between the granulosa cell and the oocyte itself. And these cells that are surrounding the oocyte actually become cuboidal in nature as well. All right, if we have a look onto stage 3, we now have the preantral follicle. And so this is basically involving the granulosa cells proliferating, and they're going to form a stratified epithelium layer around that oocyte. So the inner layer of these granulosa cells are going to contain gap junctions. And these gap junctions basically allow ions, metabolites, and signaling molecules to pass through. So it means that the oocyte and the granulosa cell can almost like communicate with each other, and they can guide each other's development and everything like that. During this stage, we also start to form what we call the theca. And the theca is basically a connective tissue cell layer that surrounds the granulosa, and it will differentiate to become something different. But it's the theca and the granulosa cells together which are going to produce estrogen. And it's specifically the inner layer of the thecal cells produce androgens as well. All right, if we move on to stage 4, this is the early antral follicle stage. And this is basically where you have the antrum, which is this thing over here, start to develop. And all it is just a fluid-filled space. And this fluid is going to be secreted by the granulosa cells. All right, so stage 5 is this weird stage over here, which basically says atresia. So atresia is basically a type of apoptosis. And at the beginning of every menstrual cycle, you actually get more than one of these primordial follicles basically being recruited and activated. You get around 10 to 25 of these primordial follicles basically being activated and undergoing steps 1 to 4. But obviously, you only get one egg that basically is able to be fertilized in most cases. And so the rest of them, or the rest of the primordial follicles, we call them the non-dominant follicles. And the non-dominant follicles basically undergo atresia, which is a type of apoptosis. But the dominant follicle, the dominant follicle over here, the dominant follicle is able to undergo and basically continue on the cycle, and it doesn't undergo atresia, it doesn't undergo apoptosis, it survives, and it's able to become the mature follicle. So the dominant follicle, the mature follicle, will basically continue to have the antrum expand. So you can see the antrum is quite big now. And the follicle itself will grow until it's ready for ovulation. So at ovulation, what happens, if you can see in this lower diagram down here, so ovulation is basically, you can see that there's basically a dominant follicle that's growing and growing and growing. But then what happens is that it grows so big that it actually just bulges from the external ovarian surface, and it ruptures that external ovarian surface. And you can see here that it's basically ruptured and going out there. So during ovulation, this secondary oocyte and surrounding cumulus cells, they're the ones that are going to be ruptured, and they're the ones that are basically expelled in the peritoneal cavity. This happens around day 14 of your menstrual cycle. So the remnants, so these are the remnants over here, the remnants are basically, it's going to be called your corpus luteum, so that's what you call your remnants. And the corpus luteum is basically just enlarged granulosa and thecal cells. And these will continue to secrete progesterone and estrogen for 3 months if pregnancy has occurred, so fertilization has occurred. And that's pretty much a really brief overview of your ovarian cycle. So we're now going to go on to the uterine cycle. So before we go on to the uterine cycle, we'll discuss what the endometrium is. And more importantly, we need to discuss the 2 layers that are basically involved in your endometrium. So you've got a functional layer over here, and you've also got a basal layer. So your basal layer is going to be unresponsive to ovarian hormones, and the functional layer is the thing that's actually going to be shed every month. So you have to basically generate or regenerate a new functional layer every time you go through the menstrual cycle. We can split the menstrual cycle, we can split this cycle into 3 main parts. So you've got your menstrual phase, which is over here. And this is the phase where the functional layer of your endometrium is basically going to be shed. You've got your proliferative phase, which is basically just the growth of the endometrium. So you can see the endometrium getting thicker and thicker as we go through the proliferative phase. And we also have the secretory phase. And the secretory phase is literally just when the functional layer is going to either be prepared for implantation, if that's going to occur, and this is under the influence of progesterone mainly. So if we go through the days, so day 1 to 5 is your menstrual phase. And this involves the shedding of your functional layer, as I've said, and we can also call that functional layer the stratum functionalis, which is basically being shed. So this whole thing is going to be shed. And this is shed, or this occurs because you've got decreasing ovarian hormones and you've got increasing prostaglandin concentrations. And then after it's shed, we can go into the proliferative phase, which is day 6 to 14. We can also call this the pre-ovulatory phase as well. And it basically involves rebuilding that functional layer. So you've gotten rid of all this functional layer, and now you need to rebuild it basically. So we're going to now rebuild that functional layer of the endometrium. And this is done by the basal layer. So the basal layer will actually create the new functional layer, and it will thicken, and this occurs basically by inducing the proliferation of glandular epithelial cells, stroma, and blood vessels. And you've also got estrogen levels rising in this phase. And these rising estrogen levels are going to ready that endometrium to respond to progesterone, which is important for the next phase. And it also, the rising estrogen also thins that cervical mucus, and it allows for the passage of sperm. And then lastly, we've got from day 15 to 28, we've got the secretory or the post-ovulatory phase. So your progesterone levels rise rapidly here, and it basically helps to prepare for the endometrium for implantation. It also causes that cervical mucus to thicken now. And the reason why we want that mucus to thicken now is because if implantation has occurred, we want protection for that embryo. We don't want anything or any bacteria or anything harming it or getting to it. So we just thicken the mucus as a barrier. But if fertilization doesn't occur, the corpus luteum, so remembering this is your corpus luteum over here, now that basically the oocyte, the secondary oocyte has basically just gone out, you've just left with that corpus luteum. And if fertilization doesn't occur, the corpus luteum will degenerate and it will stop its activity. And so if we stop the corpus luteum activity, remembering that the corpus luteum was what was producing progesterone. So if we no longer produce progesterone, or we no longer have that activity occurring, we're going to have low progesterone levels. And the low progesterone levels are what actually signals to the body to cause apoptosis of that functional layer. Apoptosis of that functional layer, i.e. shed that functional layer, and that will basically just bring us back all the way back to the menstrual phase. And that's pretty much a very brief overview of your uterine and your ovarian cycles. Hopefully this video helped you. Hopefully it gave you a little bit more about what's actually happening. If you've got any questions, feel free to just shoot us a message, and hopefully your second week of Repro is going all right.